Elias Hartwell pulled his horse to a stop when he saw the blood on the north fence line. The wind swept through the grass. His mare shifted nervously. Then he saw him. A Lakota warrior, chest soaked red, one hand inches from a knife. The wind came early that morning, dry and sharp like a blade scraped across bone. Elias Hartwell rose before the sun, as he always did, not because the work demanded it, but because dreams had stopped giving him reasons to stay in bed. He pulled on his boots in silence, the creak of old leather the only voice left in a house that hadn't heard laughter in 5 long years. Whisper Ridge Ranch wasn't much. 24 head of cattle, a crooked barn, and a well that coughed more air than water. But it was far enough from town and farther from people, and that was all Elias needed. He moved with the rhythm of a man who did everything himself, checking fence lines, oiling the old wagon wheel, hauling feed in a wheelbarrow patched more times than he could count. A photograph, yellowed with age, hung beside the door. A woman with fire in her smile, and a girl no older than 10, missing her front teeth. He never looked at it for long. By midday, the sun had begun its slow climb, casting shadows across the dry grass. Elias led his mare, Dusty, along the northern fence line, the same route he rode every Thursday since the day after the burial. He didn't expect to find anything. Trouble usually avoided this part of the world, too far, too empty, too haunted. But that morning, the silence felt different, tight, watchful. Dusty snorted, ears twitching. That's when Elias saw it, a smear of red on the lowest plank of the fence. Fresh, wet, not cow blood. He dropped from the saddle, boots landing hard. The air stood still. The grass ahead was disturbed, bent under the weight of something heavy. Elias followed the signs like he'd done so many times before, tracking lost calves, the occasional coyote. But this was no animal. 20 paces out, he saw him. A Lakota warrior, face down in the dirt. One arm twisted behind him, chest soaked through. A knife lay inches from his outstretched hand. Elias didn't move, not yet. He just stood there, one hand on his holster, the other tightening on the reins. Something was bleeding on his land, and something was about to bleed into his life. If you were Elias, what would you do? Walk away from this bleeding man, or risk everything by helping him? Tell us in the comments. Elias didn't draw his gun, but his hand stayed near the grip. Dusty shifted behind him, sensing something beyond the wound, something old and dangerous. The man in the dirt was breathing, barely, chest rising in shallow jerks. Blood pooled beneath his ribs, dark and wet, soaking into the thirsty soil of the frontier. Elias moved in slow, calculated steps, boots muffled by the dry grass. One wrong move, one twitch from the warrior, and this quiet morning would turn violent fast. The Lakota's face was turned just enough to show a cheek smeared with dust and sweat. His lips were cracked, bleeding at the edges. Fever burned across his brow. He was young, no more than 25, but his body bore the wear of many seasons. Scars along his forearms, muscle built from hunger and hardship. And yet his hand still hovered near the knife. Elias stopped a few feet away, squatted low, looked, really looked. The kid wasn't a raider. No blood on his clothes, no settler weapons, no sign of stolen goods. Just buckskin worn thin and one shattered piece of obsidian tied around his neck with sinew. His knife wasn't fancy, it was functional. There was no sign of a fight, no tracks, no horse. Elias exhaled through his nose. He should leave. This wasn't his war, wasn't his problem. The army and the tribes could burn each other to ash, and it wouldn't bring back his girls. But then the warrior's eyes cracked open, just a sliver, dark, unblinking. They didn't plead, they didn't threaten. They found Elias's, locked there, and settled on one thing, the dented water canteen on his belt. The boy's lips moved, no sound, just one word, air shaped like breath. Water. Elias cursed under his breath. He could have turned, could have walked away, left the kid to the buzzards. Nobody would have blamed him. Hell, most would have praised him. But something about that voice, that barely there whisper, didn't sound like a warrior begging for life. It sounded like someone who didn't expect kindness anymore. He reached for the canteen, unscrewed the cap, and let 3 slow drops fall into the boy's mouth. The warrior swallowed. His body relaxed just slightly. That's when Elias noticed it. A scar, faint but precise, carved like lightning over the warrior's collarbone. Not from battle, ritual. And the necklace wasn't just a charm. The symbol on it, a pair of crossing feathers etched in bone, marked him as someone important, someone whose disappearance would not go unnoticed. Elias's stomach turned. He'd just given water to the wrong damn man, and now there was no undoing it. This choice isn't just about patching a wound. If you're gripped by this tale, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next changes everything. Elias took a knee beside the young warrior. He uncorked the canteen again and tilted it gently, letting more water drip into the man's mouth. This time, the warrior swallowed with effort. His eyes fluttered, fevered but aware. No gratitude, no fear. Just the quiet understanding of a man who knew what a debt meant out here. Elias wiped his mouth with the edge of his sleeve and muttered, "Don't make me regret this, kid." He unshouldered his rifle, laid it in the dirt beside them, and reached for the pouch strapped to his saddle. Inside, wrapped in a yellowing cloth, was the small tin box he hadn't opened since the funeral. Bandages, iodine, sewing needle, thread. His wife's handwriting still smudged on the inside lid. "Don't be stubborn. Stop the bleeding." He nearly put it back. Instead, he broke the seal. With slow, practiced hands, Elias pulled the torn buckskin shirt away from the warrior's side. The gash was long, deep, likely from a blade, but clean. No signs of infection yet. He poured iodine into the wound. The boy twitched but didn't cry out. "Good," Elias grunted. "Still got fight in ya." He worked fast, fingers steady from years of stitching torn hides and split flesh. When he finished, the wound was dressed tight and covered with what little clean cloth remained. Then came the hard part. He stood, hooked his arms under the boy's shoulders, and hauled him upright. The kid groaned but didn't resist. Elias half carried, half dragged him across the field, back toward the barn, every step chewing at his spine. He kicked open the side door, cleared a corner of hay in the empty stall, and laid the warrior down. The barn creaked around him. Old wood, old secrets. Dusty snorted once, then settled. Elias leaned on the stall gate, chest heaving, sweat on his brow. Outside, the prairie wind had changed. Too still, too quiet. Something was coming, and it would be looking for the boy bleeding in his barn. Elias reached for his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and closed the barn door behind him. There were moments in a man's life where the line was drawn clear. This was one of them. The dust came first, thick and low, curling over the ridge like a storm with no thunder. Elias squinted toward the horizon, hand on his brow. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, casting long, red fingers across the land, the kind of light that made everything look like it was on fire. Then came the sound, distant at first. Hooves, dozens. By the time the first silhouettes appeared through the dust, he was already at the barn, shotgun slung loose across his shoulder, calm but alert. 70 riders, Lakota. They fanned out with practiced precision, forming a crescent around the ranch. No whooping, no shouting, just the slow, synchronized rhythm of leather and muscle and war paint under the fading sky.
At their center, mounted high on a gray stallion, rode a man Elias recognized from 100 whispered stories. Mapia Luta, Red Cloud, War Chief, Father. He dismounted with the weight of a man who'd buried too many brothers and led too many fires. His eyes found Elias before his boots found the dirt. Elias didn't move. He stood just outside the barn door, square-shouldered, hands in plain sight. No attempt to run, no attempt to lie. Behind him, inside the stall, Tokahe breathed slow and shallow. One of the younger warriors pointed. Mapia raised a hand. The line fell silent. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Elias's. They were the same height, same age maybe, but one had lost his family to fate. The other had led men through the flames of history. Mapia's voice was low, gravel thickened by years and grief. My son was supposed to return 3 days ago. Elias didn't blink. He almost didn't return at all. A pause. Mapia's gaze shifted toward the barn, then back. You patched him. You could have left him. Elias gave a small shrug. Could have. Why not? He was bleeding. Didn't see a reason to let him die. A longer pause. The wind rustled the tall grass, brushing the legs of war horses like dry waves. Then, for the first time, Mapia's shoulders dipped, just slightly. He looked past Elias, saw the hay-strewn floor, the bandages, the shadow of his son. And he nodded once. Not in thanks, not in surrender, just understanding. Elias stepped aside, clearing the barn entrance, but didn't lower his voice. He's in there, I won't hide that, but he's not yours to take, not yet. Mapia's jaw tightened, not in anger, restraint. He turned to his men and spoke in Lakota, sharp, direct. They stayed mounted. Weapons stayed sheathed, for now. As the sun dropped below the ridge, shadows stretched long across the dirt. 2 men stood between fire and powder, and the wind held its breath. Inside the barn, the shadows softened as the last light died. Mapia Luta stepped through the doorway, boots sinking into old hay. His breath carried the scent of cedar smoke and horse sweat. Elias didn't follow. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching. Tokahe stirred in the stall, his lips parted. Father, a breath more than a word. Mapia didn't speak. He knelt beside the boy, rough fingers brushing aside the sweat-matted hair from his son's brow. He saw the bandages, neat, clean, tied with skill. The silence hung heavy. Finally, Mapia rose and turned to Elias. His face was stone, voice lower than the wind. He is my only blood left. Elias gave a nod, not out of politeness, out of understanding. He almost wasn't. Mapia studied the man before him, the lined face, the tired eyes, the boots worn at the edges. A rifle on his back, but no threat in his hands. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a scout, just a man. You knew who he was? Not at first. And when you did? Didn't change what he needed. Mapia's brows lowered. Why? He is Lakota, you are not. He is my son, you are no kin to him. Elias didn't answer right away. He took off his hat, scratched his head, then stared into the darkness beyond the barn. 5 years ago, he began, my wife and daughter were caught between Fort Wyman and a hunting party. They said it was a misunderstanding, said someone moved too fast. Shots fired, everyone dead by the time the dust settled. He looked Mapia in the eyes. I've had 5 years of silence to figure out who to blame. Indians, soldiers, maybe God, maybe myself. A beat. But this morning, that boy wasn't a ghost from my past. He was just bleeding, and I had a choice. Mapia stepped closer. That choice may start a war. Elias's voice was flat, steady. Then maybe the war was already there, just waiting for a reason. The 2 men stood in silence again, breathing the same air,
bound by different griefs. Not enemies, not friends, something else. Mapia broke the stare first. He looked back at Tokahai. The boy was asleep now. Chest rising slow, lips no longer cracked. The chief turned at the door. "You have medicine, and a steady hand." He paused, but no tribe. Elias met his gaze. "Don't need one." A small, almost imperceptible nod from Mapia. "You will." He stepped into the night. Outside, the warriors were waiting, but no war cry came. Just the slow, deliberate sound of hooves turning away from blood. The next morning came without peace. No bird song, no wind. Just a silence so taut it felt like it might tear. Elias stood by the corral, tightening a loose rail, when he saw the dust cloud rising from the east. Smaller than the Lakota column, but moving with the sharp geometry of discipline. No scatter, just precision. 12 riders in blue, cavalry. At their front, a young man rode hard and straight, chin lifted like he'd swallowed a saber. Lieutenant Matthew Caldwell, Fort Wyman, age maybe 28. Ambition crackled off him like static. He wore his sidearm too tight, as if he needed the pressure to feel important. They didn't slow until the hooves hit Elias's dirt. Caldwell dismounted, barely acknowledging Elias's presence before barking orders. 2 men fanned out, rifles slung, watching the barn. "We received reports of a wounded hostile seen near this ranch." Elias didn't blink. "Might be I saw a few coyotes out by the ridge. They looked mighty hostile." Caldwell didn't smile. "Sir, I need to search your property, for your safety." Elias leaned on the fence, calm as winter. "I know what safety looks like, and this ain't it." The barn door creaked open behind them. A soft cough from inside. One of the soldiers tensed. "Sir, someone's in there." Caldwell's face darkened. His hand dropped to his holster.
"You're harboring an enemy of the United States, Mr. Hartwell." Elias stood up straight. "I'm harboring a half-dead kid who wouldn't be breathing if I hadn't stitched him up." Another pause. Then a voice rang out from the ridge above. "He's not just a kid." The Lakota had returned. Luta sat tall on his stallion, a dozen warriors behind him. No weapons raised, but none hidden either. "That boy," he said, "is my son, and he was on a mission of peace." Tension knotted in the air like dry lightning. Elias stepped sideways, putting himself directly between the barn and the 2 converging forces. His hands stayed at his sides, but every muscle was coiled. Caldwell's eyes darted between the Lakota line and the barn. He hissed to his second, "Why wasn't this in the brief? Why the hell didn't anyone tell me he was involved?" Mahipia answered, voice steady, "Because your officers stopped listening months ago." Tokahei's name hadn't been public. He was traveling in secret, carrying word between tribal elders and the territorial governor. Word of an uneasy peace. Now it was all ash. Caldwell drew himself up. Regardless of who he is, he crossed into restricted territory, armed. That makes him an enemy combatant. "He was carrying no rifle," Elias cut in. "Only a fever and a busted lung." "That's not your call, rancher." "It became my call the second he started dying on my land." Silence. Then, from the barn's darkness, Tokahei's voice came, hoarse but clear. "I crossed your border with no weapon. I carried only words, and I bled for them." Everyone turned. The boy stood in the doorway, one arm clutching his ribs, the other gripping the post for balance. Sweat poured down his brow, but his spine was straight. "And this man," he nodded at Elias, "did what neither of you dared. He listened." Caldwell's lip twitched. "This isn't over." "It never is," Mahipia muttered. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Elias did what no one expected.
He unbuckled the shotgun on his back and let it drop, slow and deliberate, into the dust. "Nobody's taking him," he said, "and nobody's shooting. Not today." The silence cracked like a frozen pond. Caldwell stepped forward, eyes locked on Elias. "Stand aside. That boy's coming with us, under arrest or in a sack." Mahapia's knuckles tightened around the haft of his war axe. "You'll touch my son when you pry him from a pile of your own men." Elias exhaled through his nose. He didn't move. Tokahei clung to the barn post, breathing hard. His skin was pale beneath the war paint. The fever hadn't broken yet. "Nobody's dying here," Elias said, voice firm. "Not if I can stop it." Caldwell's hand hovered near his holster. "Are you threatening a U.S. officer?" Elias gave a bitter half-smile. "If I was, you'd already know." From the ridge, one of the Lakota scouts whistled twice, a warning. More riders approaching. Mahapia's voice cut the air like a blade. "You sent more soldiers?" "Standard backup protocol," Caldwell snapped, "in case of resistance." Elias turned his gaze on Caldwell, slow and steady. "You brought resistance by pointing a gun at a peace envoy bleeding in my hay." A beat. Dust coiled around their boots. Then Tokahei spoke again, wheezing. "I was on my way to Red Bluff to deliver my father's words to the territorial governor. I carried nothing but a treaty draft in my pouch." He reached into his vest and pulled out a crumpled scroll, stained in blood, but intact. Mahapia's eyes widened. Caldwell froze. "No one told me this." "You didn't ask," Elias muttered, and then he stepped forward. Between both sides, hands out, voice iron calm. "Whatever line you thought was drawn in this dirt, it ends here." No one moved. The treaty parchment hung in the air between two worlds, its edges trembling in Tokahei's weak grip, the bloodstains dark against the rough hide. Mahapia stared at it like it was his son's heartbeat made visible.
Caldwell's fingers twitched by his sidearm, but his voice wavered. "This doesn't change jurisdiction. He crossed a military boundary." "So did I," Elias cut in. That snapped every head toward him. Caldwell blinked. "Excuse me?" Elias stepped forward again, placing himself fully in the center. "I harbored him, treated him, and I didn't report it, which makes me guilty by your code." He paused. "But I sleep better knowing I didn't let a boy die for paperwork." Tokahei took one step forward, still swaying. "He didn't save me to pick a side, but he chose one anyway." Then he spoke in Lakota, his voice thin but proud. The warriors behind Mahapia stirred. Mahapia nodded once, then turned to Elias. "You stand between us and those who call us enemy." "I stand where I'm needed." The chief gave a long breath. "Then you are kin to us now, and by our law, no man touches you unless he's ready to answer with blood." Behind Elias, one of the soldiers muttered, "Sir, we're surrounded." Caldwell's jaw flexed, the weight of consequence settling on his young shoulders. "If you leave with them, Hartwell, there's no coming back." Elias's reply was quiet, solid. "Wasn't planning to." He walked back to the barn, helped Tokahei down the steps, and together they stepped into the circle of riders. Mahapia raised his hand. No war cries, just a single gesture. The formation turned. The Lakota began to ride, and Elias Hartwell rode with them. For the first time in years, he wasn't riding away from something. He was riding toward it. Elias just put everything on the line. If you're finding courage in this story, hit that subscribe button because the journey has just begun.
The sun was high when they left the ranch. No horns, no banners, just the sound of hooves grinding into the dust, and a man on horseback who no longer belonged to either world. Elias rode in silence beside Tokahei, still pale, still weak, but holding on. The warriors glanced at him, not with hostility, with curiosity.
Like watching a wolf walk calmly into a bear den. Behind them, Fort Wyman's riders didn't follow. Caldwell stayed frozen near the barn, his face a locked vault of fury and calculation. He had no orders for this, no line in the manual, just a rancher who'd walked across the invisible border and made it real. Mapia Luta rode at the head. Occasionally he looked back at Elias, not with welcome, not yet, but with measure. They followed the ridge line west, winding into territory few white men had ever seen. The sky opened wider. The air grew quieter. Toka finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to come." Elias didn't look at him. He scanned the horizon like he always did. "I know." A pause. Then Toka said more softly, "They'll call you traitor." "Wouldn't be the first thing they've called me." That earned the faintest flicker of a smile from the boy, but it faded fast. "You'll be watched, judged, not just by soldiers." Elias finally looked at him. "That's fair, long as I get a fair shot to show I'm more than the jacket I don't wear." Toka nodded. "Then ride straight, Elias Hartwell. These people respect spine more than they respect blood." "Good," Elias muttered, "'cause I'm all out of kin." The path narrowed as they passed between twin bluffs, stone giants weathered by centuries of wind. Mapia raised a hand, signaling a halt. The warriors dismounted in silence, forming a wide semicircle. Elias followed suit, his knees stiff from the ride. Dust clung to his boots. Sweat streaked the back of his neck. Mapia walked toward him, no weapons in hand, no expression on his face. "This is not a game to us, Elias Hartwell." Elias didn't flinch. "Wasn't one to me either." The chief studied him a long moment, then pointed toward a jagged rock standing alone near the fire pit. "Sit." Elias sat. Mapia circled him slowly. "Among my people, a man who shelters another is either brave or hiding something." "Sometimes both," Elias replied. That earned a single raised brow from the chief. "Words are easy. Stillness is harder. You will ride with us, but until my elders say otherwise, you are watched, not hated, not trusted." "I wouldn't trust me either if I were you." Mahapia gave a grunt, half of a laugh, half of a warning. "Good. Then we understand each other." He turned to the others. "We ride before dusk." As the warriors mounted again, Elias caught sight of the ridge behind them. Far off, near the horizon, a flicker of sunlight caught metal. A spyglass. Caldwell. Watching. Elias muttered, "He's not done." Tokahei, now resting on a blanket beside his horse, whispered, "No, he's just getting started." And somewhere inside Elias, the quiet man of Whisper Ridge felt the first tremor of war humming beneath his boots. He hadn't just crossed a line, he'd been claimed by it. The trail twisted through pine and shadow, deeper into lands where no telegraph line hummed and no fence cut the soil. By late afternoon, the valley opened beneath them, a basin of grain wrapped in red cliffs, so wide it seemed to breathe. Smoke rose from small fires. Children chased dogs near teepee rings. Women stirred pots, tended skins, sang lullabies in a tongue Elias didn't know. Over 3,000 Lakota lived here. Not warriors, not ghosts. People. Elias reined in beside Tokahei, who had grown more alert with every mile. "This is where you were riding from." "From this, yes. For this, maybe." They entered the camp without fanfare. Heads turned, eyes followed.
Elias dismounted slowly, sensing he stood inside a memory not his own. Mahapya said nothing, just gestured with 2 fingers and vanished into one of the larger teepees. Tokahe leaned on Elias's arm as they walked to a quiet patch near a cedar tree. A young girl brought water in a painted gourd. She didn't speak, just looked at Elias, tilted her head, then ran. "I think she expected me to look different," Elias muttered.
"She expected you to look dangerous," Tokahai replied. Elias stared across the valley. "You're not what I pictured either." "What did you picture?" "War paint, blood, smoke, screams." Tokahai lay back on a fur blanket, face toward the sky. "You pictured the stories they told you, not the ones we lived." A long silence stretched between them. Then a voice came, dry and sure. "Stories are how men forget they're afraid." Elias turned. An old woman stood there, wrapped in raven feathers and woven shawl. Her eyes were like clouded glass, but her gaze struck true. "You carry the weight of graves behind your shoulders, Elias Hartwell." "I don't know your name." "Winona," she said. "I knew your wife long ago." Elias froze. "You knew Maria?" Winona stepped closer, her cane silent on the soft ground. "She was 18 when she came west, head full of books, heart full of fire." Tokahai blinked from where he lay. "You knew a white woman?" Winona smiled faintly. "She taught me to read. I taught her to stitch with sinew. We traded more than needles." Elias's voice turned gravel rough. "She died because a patrol mistook a Lakota trader for a raider." Winona met his eyes. "And you've hated all of us ever since?" "No, just hated myself for not being there when it happened." Silence fell like dusk. Then Winona reached into her shawl and drew out a leather pouch, a medicine bag, worn but intact. "This was hers. She gave it to me when your daughter was born." Elias's breath caught. "You knew about—" "A little girl with eyes like sunrise. Of course I knew." His hands trembled as he took the pouch. Inside, dried sage, a baby tooth, and a bead painted with twin spirals, symbol of journey and return. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Winona's voice was steady. "Because healing doesn't wait for permission, and neither does legacy." She looked out toward the ridges where smoke curled into the coming dark. "This land remembers pain like it remembers fire. It burns deep, then makes room for green again." She turned back to Elias. "You came here to save a boy, but the land brought you here to remember who you are, and to decide what kind of man you'll be now that the world's watching." Elias said nothing, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like turning away. He sat beside Tokai under the cedar and listened to the wind carry songs older than guilt. At dawn, the valley woke not to birdsong, but to hooves. A rider, lathered in sweat, cut through the trees and dismounted before Mahapya's fire like a man chased by ghosts. His breath was ragged, hand trembling as he handed over the envelope. "From Fort Sterling," he rasped, "marked urgent." Mahapya unsealed it with a bone knife. His lips moved in silence as he read. Then again, slower. His face darkened. Tokai, sitting nearby with Elias, rose with a grimace. "What is it?" The chief didn't answer. Instead, he handed the paper to Elias. The words hit harder than a rifle butt. Subject: Rogue hostile activity confirmed. One white civilian presumed kidnapped by Lakota forces. Deploying reinforcements, 500 men. ETA, 4 days. Elias folded the paper slowly. "So that's what I am now," he muttered. "A hostage." Tokai growled. Caldwell twisted it. He didn't twist, he planned it. Mahapya looked up at the ridgeline. "We must meet, tonight." As the messenger was given water, warriors already whispered, swords checked, arrows counted, and in the shadows the word passed quietly from teepee to teepee. War has been named. That night, beneath a sky split by lightning but no rain, the council fire was lit. The circle of elders sat in silence while drums echoed faintly in the hills. Elias stood at the edge, arms crossed, not yet invited to speak. Mahapya stepped into the glow. "The soldiers come not for one man. They come for fear. They do not see Elias. They see Sitting Bull. They see Red Cloud. They see war where we offer hands." A hush.
Then a young voice cut through the quiet. "Then let them see war." Heads turned. The speaker was Wakasa, a lean warrior barely older than Tokahei. His eyes burned. "They call us hostiles no matter what we do, so let us earn the name." He stepped into the firelight, raising his spear. "Let us meet them in the ravines, under the moon. Let them remember this valley like they remember Little Bighorn." A few warriors nodded. Others looked down. Tokahei said nothing. Elias exhaled through his nose. "That's it," he muttered. "The first spark." Winona, seated beside the drum circle, turned her blind eyes toward him. "You lit it when you left the ridge," she said softly. "Now you must choose if you'll be fire or water." And somewhere in the dark, 500 rifles were already marching closer. Silence. Then footsteps. Elias Hartwell stepped forward, slow and steady. No war paint, no beads, no feathers. Just an old man in a weathered coat, his boots covered in red valley dust. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hands. He just spoke. "You won't win this war." Heads turned. Wakasa, the young warrior, glared. "You have no right to speak." Elias looked at him. "I do, because I've seen how this ends." His voice was calm, cold as iron. "I saw smoke rise from homes. I saw mothers scream for sons already gone. I've pulled burnt wood off what used to be a cradle, and I've watched young men die with no one left to bury them." Wakasa stepped forward, furious. "We are not cowards." Elias didn't blink. "No, but you're young and angry. You want blood because it's the only thing that feels louder than fear." He turned to Chief Mahapya. "You'll take some of them down, yes, but the rest will come like a flood. And when they do, the ones who'll suffer won't be the ones holding rifles. It'll be the children, the grandmothers, the quiet ones." A long pause. The fire snapped. "Let me go," Elias said. "Let me speak with them." Gasps, shock. "Me and Tokahei? 2 men? No guns?"
Just the truth. Mahapya frowned. "They might shoot you." Elias nodded. "Then I'll die standing, not hiding. And maybe that's what they need to see." No one spoke, but the wind shifted, and the old man stood taller in the firelight, no longer just a rancher, but a voice, a bridge, a man who chose peace, even if it killed him. Dawn crept over Whisper Ridge like breath on a blade. The air was still. Even the birds seemed to hold their song. In the Lakota camp, 2 horses were saddled in silence. One was ash gray, the other deep chestnut. On each saddle, no rifle, no knife, just a white flag. Elias adjusted the strap on his boot. His hands trembled. not from fear, but memory. Behind him, Tokai stood tall, freshly bandaged, eyes sharp. "You sure?" the young man asked. Elias gave a slow nod. "They know my face. Let's hope they remember more than my aim." Winona approached, holding a small cloth. "For the wind," she said, "so it sees truth, not lies." It was a ribbon, white, woven from buffalo hair and cotton. Elias tied it to the end of a spear, then mounted his horse. Mahpia stood before them. "If they shoot," the chief said quietly, "it won't be a mistake. It will be a message." Elias met his gaze. "Then let's give them a better one." The valley was wide. Red earth stretched like a wound between two hills. On one side, Lakota warriors. On the other, bluecoats, hundreds of them, rifles gleaming in morning light. And in the center, two riders emerged. The wind picked up. The white ribbon danced. From a distance, every eye locked on them. One gun lifted, then another. "Don't stop," Elias muttered, "not for anything." Tokai's jaw tightened. "I won't." Step by step, the horses moved forward. Each hoofbeat sounded louder than thunder. And as the two men rode into the mouth of death, carrying nothing but truth and threadbare hope, a stillness settled across the valley, like the world itself was holding its breath. The horses stopped at the valley's heart. No one spoke. On the ridge to the west, Lakota spears stood still in the wind. To the east, blue uniforms lined the hill like steel teeth. Tension hung heavier than fog. Elias held the white flag high, its cloth fluttering. His eyes locked on a man riding out alone, straight toward them. Colonel Monroe. Broad-shouldered, silver epaulettes, eyes like granite. He didn't hurry. He didn't blink. Behind him, Lieutenant Caldwell followed, expression tight, fists clenched. They stopped a dozen feet away. Monroe dismounted. So did Elias. "You've got 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you both shot," the colonel said. His voice was cold, clear. Elias didn't flinch. "Because we're not your enemy. You sheltered a wanted man. I saved a dying boy." Tokaha stepped forward. Blood still seeped through his side, but he stood straight. "He found me by the fence. I was nearly dead. He could have left." Monroe glanced at him, then back to Elias. "And now you're both parading under a flag you don't deserve." "That flag," Elias said, "means truth, and I carry it because I've bled enough lies." Monroe frowned. A long pause. Then Elias stepped closer. "Sir, you remember Red Creek? April '72. You lost 12 men to an ambush, and one stubborn corporal stayed behind to hold the line." Monroe blinked. Elias opened his coat, showed a scar. "You pinned this yourself, right after the smoke cleared." Silence. Monroe stared. "Hartwell?" Elias nodded. "I didn't come to fight. I came to stop one." He pointed to Tokaha. "He's not your enemy either. Just a name, lost between two flags." Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. Monroe looked at the boy, then at the hills, then down at the white cloth still waving in the breeze. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Stand down," he ordered. From the ridge, hundreds of guns slowly lowered. And in that breathless silence, war blinked. It shifted. Colonel Monroe stood still, but his jaw clenched. Elias could see the battle behind the man's eyes. Years of orders, blood, and duty, fighting against something quieter, truth. "This boy," Elias said, "is Tokahe. His name means the first to speak for peace, not blood." Tokahe stepped closer. "I was on my way to Fort Sterling to negotiate." He turned, slowly, showing the faded scars along his back. "I never made it. Someone didn't want peace. They wanted a body to justify war." Caldwell bristled. "You saying it was us?" Elias looked at him. "I'm saying somebody in a blue coat pulled the trigger. That's treason. That's truth." The colonel raised a hand. Silence fell. Even the horses stood quiet. Elias stepped into the center. "Sir, I've seen war, more than most, but I've never seen it stop unless someone stood in its way." He gestured toward the ridges. "There's powder in the air, fear in every rifle. But if one shot is fired today, it won't just kill a boy. It'll kill any hope we got left." Tokaheh looked to Monroe. "He didn't save me because of my blood or my name. He didn't know I was the chief's son." "Then why?" Monroe asked quietly. Tokaheh smiled. "Because I was dying, and he didn't want to be the kind of man who walks away again." Monroe's face changed, not softened, but slowed, like something inside him finally sat down after years of standing on edge. Monroe turned to Tokaheh. The boy stood swaying, pale from blood loss, but proud. "Your people," Monroe said, "they'd follow you?" Tokaheh nodded. "Only if they believe it's peace I bring, not shame." A gust of wind pulled the white ribbon sideways. Elias stepped forward again, slower now. "Colonel, I buried a wife. I buried a son. And I thought I buried myself with them." He looked at Tokaheh. "But this boy, he reminded me I still got one more thing I can do right." Caldwell shifted, still holding on to the weight of old orders. "Sir, we can't trust them."
This could be a trap. Monroe turned sharply. "And if it's not, if this is the moment we break the wheel instead of spin it?" Caldwell didn't answer. Neither did the hills. Then Monroe unbuckled his belt, dropped his saber to the dirt. "If we're making peace, let it start without steel." He raised his hand. "Signal the ridge, lower the rifles." Caldwell hesitated, then gave the nod. From both hills, 2 flares shot into the sky. Red from the Lakota side, blue from the cavalry. The colors twisted like smoke. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Tokaheh leaned against him, weak but smiling. "You did it, old man." Elias looked across the field, toward both armies, both breathing again. "No," he said, "we did." And with that, for the first time in years, the valley heard no gunfire, only the sound of wind over dust and hearts starting over. Night fell quiet over the valley. No drums, no rifles, just the soft creak of saddle leather and the flicker of firelight. In the center of the field, a single fire burned between 2 flags. Lakota and U.S. cavalry sat in a wide circle, uneasy but present. Colonel Monroe knelt first, laid his saber beside the flame, then looked to Mapialuta. The chief nodded, removed a single eagle feather from his braid, laid it opposite the blade. 2 symbols, 2 worlds. Elias stood between them. "We can't undo the blood," he said, "but maybe we can keep it from drowning the next name written in dust." Winona stepped into the circle. No one had noticed her come. She moved like smoke. In her hands, a clay bowl filled with river water and ash. She placed it at the center. "This is water from the stream where he found the boy," she said, "and ash from the last fire of the Hartwell cabin." Her voice was rough, ancient. "One burns, one heals. Choose both, and you make peace real." Monroe reached for the bowl, dipped his fingers. So did Mapia. So did Elias. They marked their foreheads, 3 lines. Black, gray, and river clear. Tokaheh stepped forward.
still wounded, still limping, but with fire in his eyes. "This is not surrender," he said. "It is memory. We choose to remember different, starting now." Mahapia raised his voice. "Let it be known. Elias Hartwell is no longer a stranger. He is Wiyaka Wowaste, the one who keeps the oath." The name echoed around the valley. Some whispered, some wept. Even Monroe stood taller. "I'll take that name back to Washington," he said, "not as a report, but as a warning, that honor can still be louder than a gun." That night, for the first time in memory, a white man sat beside a Lakota fire, not in chains, not in fear, but in peace. And when the wind changed, it carried no smoke, only the sound of a story just beginning. 6 months had passed since the valley fell silent. No gunfire, no screams, just wind over prairie grass, and a different kind of sound, the rhythm of hammers on wood. On the edge of that same valley, a new post was rising. Not a fort, not a camp, but something different, a place called Stonefire. Built from cedar and sweat, it stood where the Lakota and cavalry once stared down death. Now, barrels of salt pork were traded for hides, corn sacks for beads, coffee for dried herbs, and at the center of it all, a tall stone pillar. Elias had helped place it there with his own hands. On its surface, 3 lines were carved deep. In English, trade, truth, trust. In Lakota, Ozani, Wowichke, Wowali. And in Latin, a language from a different world, Commercia, Veritas, Fides. Every person who passed through the gates read those words, some aloud, some in silence. Elias stood nearby, watching a wagon unload apples and dried tobacco. Tokaha helped a soldier count supplies. Mahapia Luta leaned against a post, arms crossed, observing it all. None of them spoke about what had happened that day. They didn't need to. The land remembered. The blood was gone, but not forgotten. A Lakota child ran past with a Union soldier's son, both barefoot, both laughing. Elias looked up at the mountains beyond. He didn't smile, but his eyes were softer now, like a man who had finally laid something heavy down. At dusk, the fires were lit, not for war, not for mourning, but for stew, stories, and songs from 2 tongues. Lakota elders shared tobacco with men who once rode under Union flags. A preacher from the settlement read aloud from a weathered book. A young Lakota woman translated the words beside him, not out of faith, but respect. Elias sat by the edge of the central fire. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. His presence had become its own kind of language. People brought him questions, disputes, and dreams. He listened, sometimes nodded, sometimes walked the fence line in silence before returning with an answer. They began calling him something new. Wikasha Wopapi, the man of the written stone. Others, more simply, the ghost rider with the white flag. He never corrected them. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because the name had outgrown the man. Tokahai carved new beams for the trading hall. His shoulder bore the mark of leadership, but his hands were still calloused. He worked beside Elias, not beneath him. And Mapia Luta, once a hawk with fire in his eyes, now watched his people with a quieter pride. One night, as Coyote sang far off, Elias stood before the stone pillar again, ran his hand across the Latin, Commercia, Veritas, Fides. A Lakota voice behind him whispered, "Do you believe it still holds?" Elias didn't turn, but his voice was steady. "It only holds if we keep carving." The fire cracked. The wind carried no scent of blood, only cedar and the smoke of something new. By autumn, word had spread far beyond the valley. Traders from the Dakota Plains came with salted bison. Settlers from Missouri brought tools and rail maps. Even a few reporters came, scribbling in leather-bound journals.
But no one really understood Stonefire until they met Elias Hartwell. He didn't greet them with speeches, didn't offer tours. He was often found on horseback at sunrise, riding the perimeter, checking for broken posts or strayed cattle. To the Lakota, he was more than a white man who stayed. He was a keeper of promises, a keeper of quiet, a keeper of the land where blood once fell and grass still dared to grow. The young called him the Ghost Rider with the white flag. They had never seen him in battle, but they knew he once was a storm. Now he was the calm after it. Some said he never truly smiled, but children often caught him feeding the injured hawk that wouldn't leave the barn roof, or watching the sunrise with a stillness that felt like prayer. Tokaha once told a visitor, "He doesn't talk much about saving my life. I think he's too busy living the one I gave back." By winter, the name Elias Hartwell had crossed state lines. Some wanted him to run for office. Others asked him to sign proclamations, petitions, even rifles. He refused every time. "I'm no symbol," he said once. "I'm just a man who stayed when it got hard to." But that only made the myth stronger. A Lakota grandmother carved his silhouette into pine bark, broad-shouldered, weathered, coat flapping in wind beside the flagpole. She hung it in the schoolhouse above the word Tokala, meaning the brave who crossed. Elias saw it once, paused, then left without a word. He didn't like being called hero. Heroes, in his mind, were buried in the valley. He was just still walking. But when strangers asked, Tokaha would smile and say, "Elias didn't build Stonefire to be remembered. He built it so we wouldn't forget each other." And in that way, his silence became legacy. Not in laws, not in glory, but in how the Lakota and settlers shook hands under shared roofs, in how disputes were settled with shared bread, not bullets.
And in how a white flag, torn, stitched, and flown again, still fluttered above the post at sundown. Not a surrender, but a signal. This land has already chosen peace. The wind that week came from the east, cold, dry, and unfamiliar. It carried the scent of ink and wax, not sage or smoke. And it brought wagons, 3 of them, heavy, canvas-covered, escorted by men in stovepipe hats and fine wool coats. They didn't speak Lakota, didn't smile much either. They carried papers, maps, decrees sealed with red ribbons and golden emblems. One of them, an agent from Washington, stood beneath the Stonefire pillar and cleared his throat. "The federal government recognizes the value of this land," he announced, "and proposes a partnership. Survey, extraction, infrastructure." He gestured toward the mountains. "There's gold up there. We believe it belongs to all Americans." The crowd was silent, except the wind. It pulled at coat hems and flag edges, tore at the edges of peace. Tokahe's brow furrowed. Mapialuta stood like stone. Elias stepped forward but said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the ridge. Not the agent, not the papers, just the place where sky met stone. The place where smoke once rose in war. And where, not long ago, a wounded boy nearly died for a border no one drew. The flag above Stonefire snapped in the wind, white, frayed, still holding. Elias walked past the delegation. No handshake, no anger, just quiet steps through dust that had once run red. He stood beneath the pole, eyes fixed on the horizon. The same mountain that claimed his family. The same trail he rode with Tokahe under fire. Behind him, voices argued. Parchments rustled. Gold weighed heavier than peace in their hands. Mapialuta approached. "You knew they'd come," he said, his voice like gravel worn smooth. Elias nodded.
Truth doesn't stay long where prophet walks in boots. Tokahei joined them, arms crossed. "Will we fight again, Uncle?" Elias looked up at the flag. One corner had torn loose, flapping like a broken wing, the threads unraveling in silence. "Not yet," he said, "but we might need to mend more than fabric soon." The three men stood there, warrior, chief, rancher. No orders, no answers, just understanding. And as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the torn flag caught a final gust, ripped clean in two. Half fell to the dirt, half clung to the rope. Elias picked it up gently, brushing dust from its edge. "We stitched it once," he said. "We'll stitch it again." There's a reason we keep telling stories like this, not just for the dust, the horses, or the distant gunfire echoing through canyons, but because the choices they made still echo in us. Elias Hartwell was no superhero. He didn't win with fists or speeches or grand gestures. He won by standing still when it would have been easier to run, by choosing to see a wounded boy, not an enemy, by building bridges in a time when everyone else was digging trenches. And maybe that's the lesson we need most today. We live in a world just as divided, lines drawn by race, by politics, by fear. It's easy to pick sides. It's much harder to sit between them, to listen, to risk, to be the one who carries the white flag and refuses to let it fall, even when the wind tears it in half. But it's possible, it always has been, because peace, like courage, isn't loud. It's stubborn, it's patient, and sometimes it looks like a tired rancher mending a flag in the dusk. If this story moved you, there are many more waiting. Real people, real choices, real courage. Subscribe and join us for the next chapter in True Wild West Stories, where the past still speaks and the lessons still matter.